Thank you.
Mr Speaker.
I call the Honourable Nanaya Mahuta. Tēnā koe.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'm pleased to be able to make a contribution in the third reading of this debate and want to make it very clear for those people listening that Labor supports the obligation of borrowers to pay back debt for which they have got a student loan for their education. But it could be done better, and we're simply making that point. Because when we look at this particular amendment on the back of piecemeal changes by National, which have limited access to student loans, we're simply saying that the signals are all in the wrong place. In a time of a recession, it makes absolutely no sense to cap places in our tertiary institutions when we should be signalling we want a high-skilled, high-valued, highly paid, productive workforce, and during this period of recession, now is the time to train and upskill. And those are the types of signals that are absolutely necessary. If you listen to members of the government, Mr Speaker, you would be quite easily forgiven to think that they're painting out those people who have got student loans as not wanting to work. But in fact, what I find the most demoralising story when I go into my local work and income office is story after story of highly skilled people, graduates, who are looking for work and simply cannot find work to be able to pay back their student loan. And that is demoralising because the government, alongside its solution for generating a highly skilled, highly valued, highly paid workforce, should be also presenting a plan for jobs. And they simply cannot do that because in order for students to repay debt, they have to have employment, and there should be an active government principle by which they're saying this is how regional development is occurring, here's where the jobs are. Those highly skilled graduates that we currently have in the workforce should be able to capture that job market. They simply can't. And if we think about education purely in terms of debt, then we're missing the point of investing in education. Because yes, there is $12 billion worth of debt out there, but the human capital and the lost potential of that capital not returning its skill set back to the New Zealand economy in some shape or form is a far greater debt, I would say. And we cannot leave that human potential, we cannot leave that to languish. It's a very important part of what will make New Zealand going forward a thriving country. But the signals are in the wrong place, and I wanted to highlight that because there have been contributions before me which highlighted the lack of access for a number of groups that one would think under a scheme to encourage repayment you would get a greater return of ensuring, say for example, there was access to mature students to student loans. Many mature students do know what it's like to have a mortgage. They do know what it's like to balance the budget. They do know the importance of a savings record, therefore debt reduction payment plan. But the National Government have limited access to mature students transitioning from one career to another to access student loans. The signal is in the wrong place. Mr Speaker, the other signal that's in the wrong place is repayments for those students that go overseas, those borrowers who are overseas. And we've had this debate quite clearly in the House through the committee and second reading stages, and this is a point really where Labor started to think again about its position. Because we do want those students who have got a qualification to go and have their OE to experience life overseas. It's funny how when you go overseas you do appreciate your own country more, and too few New Zealanders go overseas to be able to have that experience. And we thought, well, actually, when you look at the repayment holiday, it was an arbitrary decision around the setting of the 3-year period. Why not align it to 2 years when most working holidays are kind of for that duration? We thought it was a common sense approach, that it could be, it was certainly supported by and large by current practice, but the government failed to recognise its virtues and did not support that particular amendment put forward by Labor, and we thought it was a practical, common sense amendment that sent the right signals to those students travelling overseas. Go, have your experience over there, you know, enjoy what there is to offer over there, but come back and having that repayment period looked at in the kind of way that Labor was proposing, we thought sent the right signal for the right reason, because we do want our skilled people to return to Aotearoa New Zealand so that they can make a contribution in this country. Mr Speaker, I also heard contributions around, in a very loose sense, the profile of the student borrower. Now, NZ USA put out a report some years ago which showed that the average profile of a tertiary student was a 35-year-old Polynesian woman. And in that regard, to the extent that the repayment of student loans are something that this particular bill focuses on, I would think, and I would tend to align myself with the comments made by New Zealand First, if you're going to give a repayment holiday, consideration certainly should be given to that same provision in the spirit of fairness applying here in New Zealand. Because for women in particular, when they go and study, simple things by way of having children, by way of putting your own needs aside for your family's needs, present very real challenges for women who are taking up tertiary study and may need support such as that. So for that reason alone, I certainly support the direction of thinking that could be pursued going forward. Mr Speaker, it's also a really important point, because at a time when we do know that this is the average profile of students going into tertiary study, what did National do? They cut the training incentive allowance, which allowed access for a contribution towards higher level courses. So there are more women actually going into debt because of actions that the government has taken to remove the training incentive allowance. Mr Speaker, that's increased debt for many women, and it's actually made it a higher barrier for women to get a higher qualification. Again, it sends the signal in the wrong place, and it will not lead to a higher skilled, more productive economy. It will just put barriers up. Mr Speaker, there was some debate in the House also of the contact person, and I want to limit, I guess, my particular focus to contact persons of those currently with student loans. Those parents who might have put their names down and said, yes, we'll be the contact person, but this bill will present new obligations. And all I ask, and I asked for clarification during the committee stages, is what will the government do to ensure that those contact persons of existing borrowers are informed of their new obligation, and will they have the opportunity, Mr Speaker, to opt out? Because they may be obligations going forward that they hadn't quite considered. And let's face it, you know, sometimes when your child goes away and leaves home, you generally don't know what they're up to. It's just common, you know, it's just what happens. Mr Speaker, finally, I'd really like to impress in this House and for those listening that Labor supports the intent and the repayment obligations of borrowers. We just think it can be done in a better way, and by and large, these amendments in this particular bill, against the backdrop and panacea of piecemeal changes that the government has made in the space of tertiary education, which certainly sends the wrong signals, does not support what Labor believes is the future for New Zealand, which is a highly skilled, high-value, productive workforce of people who can contribute to making our country a great, thriving nation. Mr Speaker, for the repayment holiday provisions that were not supported by National, and on that basis, Labor will oppose this bill.
I call the Honourable Member Maggie Barry.
I rise to speak.